My name is Commander Yal Oren, and I want to tell you exactly what it felt like to watch the stars begin to move. It was not a gradual thing. One moment the sky above Geneva was dark and full of the ordinary lights I had known my whole life. Fixed, patient, ancient. The next moment, those lights were shifting. Not like meteors, which streak and vanish. Not like satellites, which crawl in slow, predictable arcs. These lights moved with purpose, with the kind of steady, deliberate confidence that told you immediately, at some deep level below thought, that something intelligent was behind each one of them. Thousands of points of light, rearranging themselves across low orbit like pieces on a game board, being reset by a player who already knew the outcome. I was standing on the roof of the Geneva command spire when it happened. I had gone up there to drink coffee and breathe cold air, and think about a maintenance report I was supposed to file on a piece of drilling equipment back at Lunar Base 14. I had spent 6 years on the lunar surface, boring into rock, mapping underground formations, cataloging things that nobody seemed particularly interested in. I was an engineer, not a soldier. I was the last person anyone would have expected to be standing where I ended up standing that night. The Varric Dominion announced itself with a broadcast. It arrived on every communication frequency simultaneously, translated into every human language, including several extinct ones that none of us had spoken in centuries. The message was short. I remember every word of it, though I wish sometimes that I did not. They said, "You are catalogued, you are assessed, you are found insufficient. Surrender your world or it will be reduced." That was the entire message. No threats beyond the final one, no list of demands, no ceremony. They had looked at us, decided what we were, and moved on to the administrative portion of our destruction. I will never forget the silence that followed. Not panic, silence. Every person on that rooftop, every person in that building, every person watching on screens around the world, seemed to breathe in at exactly the same moment, and simply forget to breathe out. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes when something too large to fully understand enters your life. It has a texture to it. That silence. It feels like the moment before a wave breaks, when the water pulls back from the shore, and everything goes still, and you realize the stillness is not peace, but simply the shape that catastrophe takes, in the second before it arrives. Then the world answered. Every government moved. Every defense network spun up. Every orbital platform that humanity had spent the last 60 years quietly assembling, officially for research purposes, was suddenly doing what it was actually built to do. I had always known those platforms were not purely scientific. Every engineer who worked on them knew. We just never talked about it out loud. We were a species that had learned, over a very long history of very bad centuries, to prepare for things we hoped would never come. It turned out we had prepared well. Not well enough, but well. We fought for 72 hours. I want that number to sit with you for a moment. 72 hours against a civilization that had been traveling between stars before our ancestors had invented the wheel. Every pilot who launched knew the mathematics of the situation. Every crew member on every orbital station understood that the tonnage and number of ships above them made survival statistically impossible. They launched anyway, they fired anyway, they kept their stations and held their posts, and gave back more than anyone in the Dominion had calculated they would. Because apparently nobody had told the Dominion what humans do when they are cornered and have nothing left to protect, except the idea that they did not go quietly. Then the Dominion stopped being impressed and began being efficient. I watched city by city, the way a doctor watches readings on a monitor. Sydney's defense grid, gone. Mumbai's atmospheric cannon network, silenced in under 4 minutes. The hardened command bunker beneath Chicago, cracked open from orbit, as easily as you would crack an egg. The Dominion did not destroy these places. That was the part that frightened me most. They could have. They chose not to. They managed us. They neutralized, contained, suppressed. We were not worth their anger. We were a logistical problem they were solving with calm professionalism, and there is no more terrifying thing in the universe than an enemy who does not consider you a threat. The Secretary General surrendered from a bunker in the Swiss Alps. I watched it on a cracked monitor in a basement corridor. My hands were still. I noticed that about myself and filed it away. Then my communication unit lit up on a frequency I had seen printed exactly once in my life, on a document so classified that I had not even been permitted to ask why I had access to it. The document was labeled with a single word: Warden. The message that came through was 14 characters. It was my name and a set of coordinates. Lunar surface, far side, the Schrödinger basin. I had drilled for 18 months within 3 kilometers of those coordinates. I had never noticed anything unusual. I took a shuttle. I will not explain precisely how I obtained it, because that story is less dramatic than the one that follows, and would only slow things down. I burned hard for the moon, and came in low over the far side in the dark, following the numbers on my screen, and when I was close enough to see the crater wall in question, I watched it open. Not crack, not crumble, open. A section of crater wall 400 meters wide, rotating inward on some mechanism I could not see, soundless in the vacuum, with the unhurried patience of something that had been waiting for a very long time, and felt no need to rush now that the moment had finally come. Inside was a mind. Not a computer in any sense I had used that word before. A distributed intelligence, housed in crystalline processing material, woven through 60 cubic kilometers of lunar rock. It introduced itself as Warden Prime, and told me, in a voice that sounded inexplicably like my grandmother's, that it had been built by humans. Not the humans I knew, earlier ones, a civilization that had existed before recorded history, before the gap that our archaeologists had never been able to fully explain, before the long dark period from which our known ancestors seemed to emerge having forgotten more than they remembered. Those earlier humans had seen the pattern, not the Dominion specifically. They could not have known the name, but they had understood the universe well enough to know that a small, warm, inhabited world on the edge of an interesting galaxy would eventually draw attention from something larger and older and less gentle. They had 12,000 years to think about what to leave behind. What they chose to leave was not an army. It was not a shield. It was the moon itself, rebuilt from the inside out. Our moon, which is unusually large for a planet of our size, and unusually stable in ways that had puzzled scientists for generations, was not entirely natural. Its core had been hollowed and reinforced, and seeded with an array capable of manipulating gravitational forces across a radius of 40,000 kilometers. Warden Prime called it a tidal engine. I called it the most astonishing thing I had ever heard in my life, and I had just watched an alien empire disable Earth's entire defense network in 3 days. The Dominion fleet was sitting at 32,000 kilometers from Earth's surface. Warden Prime asked me if I understood what activation would mean. I said that I did. It said that understanding was required. Not authorization from a government, not a committee vote, not a military chain of command. A single living human being who comprehended the full weight of the decision and made it with clear eyes. My ancestors had built a very particular kind of safeguard into this system. They had not wanted it used by someone who did not understand what it meant to use it. I sat in the dark of that chamber for a long time. I thought about the 72 hours. I thought about the pilots who had launched knowing the numbers. I thought about the Secretary General's voice on that cracked monitor, steady and dignified in the way that people are sometimes steady and dignified when they have run completely out of other options. I thought about what it meant to speak for 8 billion people who had not elected me and did not know I existed. I thought about the men and women who had built this place, who had worked for generations on something they would never see used, who had trusted that eventually, if they built it carefully enough, and hid it well enough, and designed the activation with exactly the right conditions, the right human being would find their way here at the right moment. I gave the word. There was no sound. No vibration I could feel. Warden Prime's activation sequence moved silently through the crystalline lattice and down into the tidal engine at the core of the moon, and I watched what happened next through the facility's sensor feeds because I was inside the instrument and could not see it directly from outside. Every Dominion ship within the effective radius experienced simultaneous gravitational disruption. Warden Prime had been precise about the calibration. The goal was not destruction. The goal was arrest. 412 ships, including 6 of the Dominion's largest command vessels, had their propulsion systems torn from their moorings by forces their engineers had never needed to account for because nothing in explored space had ever produced them at this scale. Navigation systems registered readings so far outside their operational parameters that they shut themselves down in self-protection. The fleet hung in space, perfectly preserved, every crew member unharmed, every hull intact. absolutely incapable of movement in any direction. 412 ships, held in place as gently and completely as insects in amber. The Dominion admiral broadcast a demand for explanation. I answered him myself, from inside the moon, on his own command frequency, and I want to be accurate about the fact that my voice was completely steady when I did it. I told him that we had surrendered because we chose to, not because we had to. I told him that the system he had just experienced could have been activated in the first hour of the invasion, and that we had not done so because we wanted him to see us fight. I wanted the Dominion to understand that what had just happened to their fleet was not desperation, was not a last trick, was not something we had stumbled into by accident. It was a deliberate choice made by people who understood exactly what they were choosing. I told him that we were now offering a second choice: leave peacefully, or remain in this orbit as our guests, while we used the communication infrastructure that Warden Prime had been quietly maintaining for 9,000 years to contact every civilization the Varick Dominion had ever absorbed, and begin a very different kind of conversation than the one they had arrived intending to have. The silence on the command frequency lasted 11 minutes. I counted. The galaxy did not learn about what had happened slowly. The sensor logs from 400 ships transmitted automatically to Dominion command networks, which connected to interstellar communication relays, which fed into a galactic information infrastructure that Earth had not known existed. Within 48 hours, what had happened above Earth was the most discussed event in a governing body called the Galactic Senate, another institution we had not known existed, representing species from across a region of space so large that the numbers describing it stopped feeling like numbers and started feeling like poetry. Warden Prime told me it had been monitoring Senate communications for approximately 9,000 years. It had a great deal of useful information to share. Species sent messages. Some were cautious and diplomatic. Some were openly emotional, in ways that the translation systems struggled to convey accurately, but which I understood immediately, because there are feelings that do not need precise language to cross any distance. There were civilizations out there who had been inside the Dominion's administrative structure for generations, and had never had a reason to believe that anything would change. I will not describe what it felt like to read some of those messages, because the honest description would not fit neatly inside any words I have. The Dominion negotiated. This was, according to Warden Prime's historical records, unprecedented. In all of recorded galactic history, the Varick Dominion had never negotiated with a newly contacted species. They had assessed, and they had acted. That they were willing to sit at a table with us, even a metaphorical one conducted over tight beam communication across 32,000 kilometers, meant that something fundamental had shifted in the way they were thinking about us. We had not just surprised them, we had changed the category they put us in. I sat in the moon for 6 days while the negotiations proceeded. Warden Prime kept me company. I asked it many things. I asked why our ancestors had built something this powerful, and then hidden it rather than using it for themselves. Warden Prime took what I can only describe as a thoughtful pause before answering. Then it said, "Because power used before you are ready to carry it, changes you in ways that cannot be reversed. They did not want to give you something that would shape you before you understood who you were. They wanted you to become worth it first." I sat with that sentence for a long time. On the 7th day, I traveled back to Earth. The Dominion fleet was still in orbit, still inert, still waiting for the terms of their departure to be finalized. I landed in Geneva, in the same plaza beneath the same spire where I had been standing when the stars began to move. The sky was clear. People were beginning to come out of shelters, blinking in the morning light, looking up at the ships above them with an expression I recognized because I had worn it myself. That particular mixture of fear and wonder that happens when the world turns out to be much larger and stranger than you believed. I looked up too. I found the moon in the pale morning sky, ordinary and silent, exactly where it had always been, looking like nothing more than what everyone had always assumed it was. A simple, ancient, unremarkable rock, keeping its patient orbit. Something almost like a smile moved through me then. We had not survived by luck. We had not survived by accident. We had survived because someone who loved us completely, 12,000 years before we were born, had looked at the universe with clear eyes and decided that we were worth protecting until we became worth trusting. And in 72 hours of burning and holding and refusing to stop, we had proven something to ourselves that no weapon and no victory could ever have given us otherwise, that we had become, at last, the people they had hoped we would be. The galaxy was about to learn who it had been dealing with all along. So was I.